While most 5-year-olds are learning to read or play in the backyard, little Noah steps into a courtroom clutching a drawing in a desperate hope. He looks the judge in the eyes and asks, "If I heal your legs, will you let my dad go?" Everything stops. The judge, broken by tragedy and bound to the law, makes a choice no one expects. He gives the boy 30 days. What follows isn't just a legal delay, it's the beginning of a bond that will test faith, rewrite justice, and bring the coldest heart back to life. Through drawings, laughter, and a dance no one sees, Noah leads a man out of his darkest hour. Stay with us, because in this story, it's not the miracle that changes everything. It's the promise. The courtroom was already on edge before the boy spoke. Robert sat behind the glass barrier in a faded beige jumpsuit, his hands cuffed, his face hollowed by days and holding. His eyes rarely left the boy sitting in the first row of the gallery. Noah, 5 years old, legs swinging above the floor, clutching a crumpled drawing in one hand and a blue plastic inhaler in the other. When Judge Catherine Westbrook entered, the room stood, out of routine, not reverence. The judge's wheelchair made its slow, practiced turn toward the bench, and a bailiff assisted with the usual adjustments. The prosecutor, David Chun, launched into a dry, measured outline of the charges: theft, trespassing, and endangerment. The public defender barely had time to begin her defense when Noah rose quietly from his seat and stepped past the barrier. At first, no one noticed. His voice was small but clear. "Your Honor," he said, and all motion stopped. He looked directly at Westbrook, his eyes too steady for a child that age. "If I fix your legs," he said, "will you let my dad go?" The room didn't gasp, it simply froze. 1 second stretched into eternity. The judge blinked but said nothing. Something somewhere had just cracked open. The bailiff reached for the boy's arm, but Westbrook raised a hand, stopping him. The judge's eyes were fixed on Noah. There was no trace of mockery in the boy's voice, no sign he was performing, just raw, absurd sincerity. Robert stood, rattling the chains of his cuffs. "Noah, sit down," he barked, panic in his voice. But the judge gestured for him to stop. "Let him speak," Westbrook said, his voice low but resolute. Noah nodded, as if that had been his plan all along. "My dad didn't want to steal. He just wanted me to breathe. I couldn't breathe that night. The machine was broken. He didn't have money, so he ran to get the medicine. He always runs fast." His voice cracked, but he stood his ground. "I saw on TV the doctor said you wouldn't walk again. But maybe ... maybe your legs just forgot. Can help them remember." The courtroom remained suspended in a strange kind of stillness, a liminal space between the absurd and the sacred. Judge Westbrook leaned back slightly in his chair. For the first time in many years, he wasn't thinking about the law. He was thinking about how long it had been since anyone had spoken to him like that, with hope, not pity. The prosecutor tried to regain control, standing with a stack of files in hand. "Your Honor, we can't allow emotional manipulation," he began, but Westbrook cut him off with a look. "Mr. Chun," he said, "unless the child is actively obstructing justice, I believe we can afford him another 60 seconds. The defender, stunned silent until now, whispered to Noah, trying to coax him back to the bench. But Noah didn't move. He walked closer to the judge's bench, stopped at the base of the platform, and gently held out the paper he had been holding. "I drew this for you," he said. On the page, a figure in a wheelchair had flames coming out of its wheels like rockets. Another figure, smaller, childlike, was holding a wrench, smiling. "That's me. I'm fixing your rocket wheels." Westbrook stared at the drawing. His throat tightened in a way he hadn't felt in years. He remembered when his wife used to draw for him in the hospital, when they still believed in things like progress and miracles. She was gone now, and so was that part of him. Or at least it had been. The silence in the room thickened again, now carrying a weight no statute or case law could name. Westbrook breathed in, slow and deliberate. "Young man," he said, "are you suggesting that if I allow some time, you'll heal me?" Noah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I'm really good at helping things get better. I just need time. I can't do it if he's not with me." He gestured to his father. The room felt like it had shrunk. Robert stood frozen, his chest rising and falling too fast. Westbrook glanced at him, then back to Noah. The gavel was still untouched. He didn't bang it. Instead, he spoke in a tone that surprised even him. "Mr. Langston," he said to the clerk, "remove today's sentencing from the docket. Reopen deliberations under a conditional clause. I am granting a 30-day continuance." Chun opened his mouth, but the judge silenced him with a raised palm. "If the boy fails to deliver on his promise," Westbrook added, "we reconvene with full sentencing as originally scheduled with enhancements." His voice sharpened on that last word. "Understood?" Gasps rippled quietly through the back rows. Noah turned to look at his dad, who now had tears in his eyes. "You did this?" Robert mouthed, and Noah nodded, beaming. The judge, meanwhile, dismissed the court but didn't leave. He watched Noah walk back toward the gallery, drawing clutched against his chest. He felt something shift inside him, something unfamiliar. Not forgiveness, not grace, something smaller but no less radical. A tremor of possibility, maybe. Just maybe. In his chambers that night, he would stare at the drawing again and wonder if the boy was delusional or divine. But in the courtroom, he remained composed. 30 days, he repeated softly to no one in particular. Let's see what 30 days can do. Around him, people stood and filtered out, unsure of what they had just witnessed. No gavel fell, no precedent was set, but a story had begun, and everyone who had been there would carry it with them like a seed. By the time the courtroom emptied, the boy and his father were being led toward opposite doors, one to freedom, the other still in custody, but with the faintest thread of hope tying them together. The judge remained alone on the bench, his hand resting lightly on the edge where the paper had been moments earlier. He stared down at his unmoving legs, not with bitterness, but with quiet curiosity, as if seeing them for the first time in years. "Fix your rocket wheels," the boy had said. The phrase echoed not like a child's fantasy, but like a challenge. He didn't believe in miracles, but now he wasn't sure he didn't believe in Noah. The boy had made a promise in the courtroom, and that promise had changed something fundamental, not just in the judge, but in everyone who had been within earshot. No verdict had been delivered, yet a line had been drawn. In the sweltering heat of that packed courtroom, no agreement had been signed, but something more powerful had been born. Not a legal motion, a human story. 3 weeks earlier, Robert's hands trembled as he laid the last of the coins on the kitchen counter. Pennies, nickels, one faded dime, a total of $4.61. Nowhere near enough. The small, wheezing breaths behind him reminded him of every sleepless night, every visit, every doctor who said the same thing in different, exhausted tones. You need consistent treatment, daily inhalers, a nebulizer. But consistency was a luxury they couldn't afford. Robert turned slowly. Noah lay curled on the worn couch, a blanket up to his chin, his eyes glassy but alert, his chest lifted in shallow pulses, each one sounding like a storm was trapped in his lungs. "I'm okay, Dad," the boy rasped. "It just tickles." Robert managed a thin smile, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'll be right back, buddy." He stuffed the inhaler prescription into his jacket, knowing it had expired. Knowing they'd turn him away again, but this time he wasn't going to ask. This time he wasn't walking out without that medicine one way or another. And as he left, Noah reached for his crayons with weak fingers, drawing the ocean he'd never seen and the father who kept trying to get him there. Robert's footsteps quickened as he neared the pharmacy. He had scoped it out before, not to steal, just to calculate hope. There were only 2 employees on shift this time of night, and he knew exactly where the inhalers were shelved. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but pride meant nothing when your child couldn't breathe. Pride didn't sit beside an oxygen-starved 5-year-old or hold his hand through a hospital bed rail. Stepping inside, he nodded to the cashier, picked up a pack of cough drops for show, and walked the aisles like any tired customer. But his heart was sprinting. He paused in front of the medical supplies and slid the inhaler off the shelf, palming it quickly beneath his coat. No alarms rang. No one screamed. The world didn't punish him, not yet. As he turned to leave, a woman with a baby stroller blocked his way. He murmured an apology, diverted down another aisle, and that hesitation cost him everything. Just as he reached the exit, a voice called out, "Sir?" Then came the flash of a badge, and before he could even respond, 2 hands grabbed his arms. "We saw you on the camera. Don't make this worse." Robert didn't run. He didn't fight. He just whispered, "My son can't breathe," as the cuffs clicked shut. At the precinct, they processed him like they would any other thief, but Robert wasn't thinking about his rights or the charges. He kept asking one thing over and over. Did they take the inhaler back? The officer didn't answer. Did they let me keep it? Another silence. Did they let me give it to him? The interrogating officer grew impatient, tossed a clipboard in front of him. "You're lucky it was nonviolent. You might get out with probation." Robert laughed, bitter, short. He might not get out at all. They let him make 1 phone call. He called the hospital directly, gave Noah's full name, begged them to check. "Please, just tell me if he's breathing." The nurse on the other end paused. "He's stable now," she said. Someone brought him in. He came in alone, had an inhaler. No ID. Robert's knees buckled. Somehow, some miracle of the streets, the inhaler had reached Noah, or maybe Noah had reached it. That thought, the image of his son standing alone at a hospital check-in, clutching stolen medicine and not crying, would haunt and humble him for years to come. Noah had arrived at the hospital sometime before midnight, bundled in his hoodie, face pale. He had walked there, alone, through 4 blocks of cold, past shuttered stores and blinking streetlights. He didn't wait for someone to carry him. He just walked until his legs ached and his throat burned more than his lungs. At reception, he handed the woman his father's ID and the inhaler. "I can't breathe good," he said simply. The nurse rushed him in, and as the machine began to hum, the blessed, familiar purr of albuterol reaching his airways, he didn't cry. He lay back on the stiff mattress, the inhaler gripped tightly like a warrior's medal, and drifted in and out of sleep. The only thing he said before closing his eyes was, "My dad's coming soon." He believed it, not because he was naive, but because believing it hurt less than wondering if it was true. Nurses checked on him throughout the night. They offered him snacks he barely touched. He didn't let go of his backpack. When they asked if there was anyone to call, he shook his head. He had only one job: wait. Morning came, but Robert didn't. Noah sat in the waiting room now, legs tucked under him on a bench too big for his small frame. Nurses came and went. Security checked on him. Still no tears, just quiet persistence, like waiting was a skill he'd trained in. When a police officer finally arrived, the nurses didn't want to let him near the boy. "He's just a kid," one said. "Give him a minute." But the officer insisted. Noah recognized the uniform and understood in the way only children who grow up too fast do. "He's not coming, is he?" he asked. The officer didn't know how to answer. "He's safe," the man offered. "We'll take you somewhere safe too." Noah didn't argue. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was crayon on cheap notebook paper, a drawing of himself and Robert standing in front of a vast blue ocean holding hands. The sky was too big for the page and the waves were wild. "Can I bring this with me?" he asked. That was all. No begging, no tears, just that single request. The officer nodded. Noah took his backpack, placed the drawing carefully inside, and stood up. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't ask where they were going. He walked beside the officer, step steady, fingers curled tight around the strap of his backpack. Behind him, the drawing settled like a secret inside the worn cloth. 2 figures holding hands in front of a sea neither of them had ever touched. But they would, someday. That promise lived in the lines of blue crayon and hope that refused to die. Noah didn't cry. Not even when they opened the cruiser door. He climbed in, turned to look once more at the hospital doors and then forward. He was going to see his dad again. He had to. That part of the story wasn't over yet. And as the car pulled away, the image of that drawing stayed with the nurse who'd watched him leave. She would remember it for the rest of her life. Because in that moment, in that quiet, fearless act of faith from a boy too small to carry so much alone, something sacred had taken root. Catherine Westbrook had not always been made of stone. Once, long ago, before the silence in his bones took hold, he had music in his hands. Jazz records on Sunday mornings, old upright piano in the corner of the apartment, fingers that moved with instinct instead of calculation. His wife, Lena, used to laugh when he played for her, not because he was particularly good, but because he played with a kind of earnest vulnerability that couldn't be faked. He was soft back then, softer at least. But softness has no place in a burning car or in the silence that follows the sound of metal twisting into itself. The accident stole more than his ability to walk. It stole his language, his light, and his permission to dream. It was Lena who died instantly, but Catherine buried himself that same day. In the months that followed, he traded the fluidity of sound for the rigidity of law. There was no music in statutes, but there was structure, control, and in that, a kind of safety. Over time, the court became his cocoon. His chambers a cave, and his face a mask of functional detachment. It worked, until the boy with the big eyes disrupted everything. The interruption had come with no warning. The courtroom was moving on rails like always. Procedure, protocol, posture. Then, a child's voice. "Excuse me, sir, but I know how to dance with my arms." The room had stopped. Westbrook hadn't responded right away, unsure if the boy was even speaking to him. But then the child walked forward, tiny hands clutching a folded piece of paper, and repeated it. "Even if you can't use your legs, you can still dance. I'll show you how." And that, somehow, was worse than any insult or mockery. It was pure in a way that felt dangerous. Catherine had shut it down quickly, as gently as he could, but the moment clung to him all day. Even as he tried to focus on other cases, other motions, he kept seeing those eyes. That voice, the ridiculous courage of it. That night, alone in his chambers, the folder from the case still open, he found the paper the boy had handed him. He almost tossed it in the trash immediately. Almost. But something in the way it was folded, careful, but not obsessive, made him pause. He unfolded it slowly. What he saw made him freeze. It was a drawing, crude, done in crayon. The lines were jagged, the proportions off, but the message was clear. A boy with a tool belt stood behind a wheelchair that had literal rocket boosters on the sides. Flames shot from the wheels. Above it, in large letters, was written, "We can fix you." Catherine stared at it for a long time. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But he didn't throw it away either. That alone was seismic. He placed it face down on his desk and reached for the bottle of pills he rarely took. His doctor had told him years ago that the problem wasn't only in his spine, it was also in his nervous system's reluctance to believe movement was possible. Psychosomatic, she'd hinted. He'd rejected the theory. It was easier to say the chair was permanent, safer. Because if the chair was permanent, then so was the grief, and if the grief was permanent, then maybe he didn't have to face a life that still had room for possibility. But the boy, this Noah, had not asked for permission to believe. He had simply offered it. And now the drawing sat there alive with a kind of hope Catherine wasn't ready for. In the solitude of his evening, Westbrook found himself doing something foreign, thinking about what the boy might be like outside of a courtroom. What kind of kid thinks to offer healing to a stranger? What kind of child looks past a judge's black robe and sees a man with broken legs worth saving? Catherine leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He remembered how Lena used to say that children had better instincts than adults. They haven't been trained to pretend yet, she once told him. Maybe that's what had hit him so hard. Noah hadn't been performing. He hadn't asked for sympathy. He had just looked at Catherine and offered connection without fear, without agenda. That kind of courage was rare, even among grown men, especially among them. Catherine looked at his own hands, veined, scarred, unfamiliar to him now, and wondered when exactly he had stopped being someone children could talk to. He used to be a teacher once, long before law school. He used to laugh easily. The thought made his throat tighten. The boy didn't just remind him of the past. He reminded him of the possibility of a future. Still, that was dangerous ground. Empathy in the courtroom had consequences. It muddied the lines. Catherine had built his entire second life on those lines, crisp and unsentimental. But here was a case that refused to be filed neatly away. A man had broken the law, yes, but he had done it to save his son. The facts were clear. The boy's words, however, had introduced something dangerously ambiguous. Mercy. Catherine pulled the drawing back toward him, examined the little stick figure with goggles, smiling beside the wheelchair. There was no guilt in that smile. No begging, just belief. He closed the file, turned off the lamp, and stared into the dark, thinking about rocket boosters and tiny wrenches in legs that might one day wake up, not because of therapy or medicine or science, but because a boy believed they could. And belief, Catherine remembered, could be a powerful thing, far more than the law ever allowed room for. In the morning, the routine resumed: coffee, case files, the rustle of clerks, and the rhythm of authority. But as he entered his office, Catherine paused. The drawing was still there, right where he'd left it, unfaded, unthrown. For years, any unsolicited object had gone straight to the trash. Letters from former defendants, sympathy cards from colleagues, even Lena's unfinished birthday note, which he had never opened, but this he kept. The boy had said he knew how to dance with his arms, and for some reason Catherine believed him. He reached for the page and held it up to the light. The flames on the wheelchair looked ridiculous, almost comical, and yet there was something in them that felt true, as if the boy had seen something he had forgotten how to look for. And for the first time in all those long, silent years, Catherine didn't throw it away. The request had come through the public defender, but Catherine still wasn't sure why he'd agreed to it. Perhaps it was morbid curiosity. Perhaps it was guilt, or even something stranger, a desire to confront whatever it was that child had awakened in him. Either way, he found himself pushed down the gravel path of a nearby park, flanked by 2 security officers and 1 grim-faced staff liaison. The meeting was to be short, supervised, and entirely non-therapeutic, as the official memo had insisted. Catherine repeated the phrase to himself like a mantra, but nothing about this felt procedural. When he saw Noah walking toward him, a grocery bag bouncing at his side, something in his chest tightened. The boy's stride was confident but unhurried, like he already knew how this would go. "Hi," he said simply, and sat cross-legged in front of the bench where Catherine's chair had been positioned. He pulled out a pack of crushed cookies, offering one as if it were a peace treaty. Catherine hesitated, then took it, not to eat but to acknowledge the gesture. "Thanks," he muttered, voice caught somewhere between caution and amusement. Noah just smiled. Today we're going to play a game, he said. It's called Wake Up the Legs. Catherine blinked. Is that a real game? He asked. Noah shrugged. It is now. I made it up for you. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and unwrapped it like a map. Drawn in crayon was a sequence of stick figure poses, each showing exaggerated arm movements and silly postures. You don't need legs to play, Noah explained, matter of fact. You just need to believe they're asleep and that your arms can shout loud enough to wake them up. The absurdity of the statement struck Catherine like a slap and a caress at the same time. You think my arms can yell at my legs? He asked. Why not? Noah said with a shrug. You said they don't work. But maybe they're just ignoring you because you stopped talking to them. The simplicity of the answer left no room for logic. It was disarming. Catherine looked down at his own hands, motionless in his lap, and then tentatively lifted one. Like this? He asked, rotating it in a clumsy wave. No, Noah giggled. Bigger. It's like you're stirring clouds like this. He flung his arms up, spinning his wrists in wild circles, laughing with his whole body. Cloud soup, he shouted. Catherine blinked again. Then, without meaning to, he mimicked the motion. At first, he only meant to humor the boy. A meaningless gesture, a pantomime. But the moment his arms began to move, something shifted. Not in his legs, not physically, but somewhere deeper. The motion was clunky, unpracticed, almost embarrassing. Yet Noah didn't laugh at him. He laughed with him as if Catherine's participation validated the game entirely. You're doing it, Noah exclaimed. You're stirring the soup. It was ridiculous. It was childish. It was the most human thing Catherine had done in years. He caught himself smiling, just a flicker, and quickly masked it, but Noah caught it anyway. See? The boy said softly. They're listening. Catherine shook his head. You're really something, you know that? Noah tilted his head. Is that good? I haven't decided yet. Catherine's voice had a dryness to it now, not cold, but amused. Noah nodded solemnly. That's okay. You've got 30 days. Catherine froze. The reminder landed like a stone. 30 days until sentencing. 30 days for what? He didn't know. But the boy's certainty unnerved him more than any cross-examination ever had. They continued for a while, trading poses and gestures that seemed to have no logic other than Noah's imagination. The staff watched from a distance but didn't intervene. Every so often, Catherine would glance over, expecting them to shut it down. But they didn't. Maybe they too were caught in the strange magnetism of it, of a child who had nothing and gave everything with just a drawing, a cookie, and a silly dance. At one point, Catherine lowered his arms, panting slightly, and Noah stopped too. Tired? He asked, mock serious. You'd try waving your arms around like a lunatic for 10 minutes and see how you feel. Catherine's tone was gruff, but Noah's grin said he understood it as play. Then the boy's face softened. When my chest hurts, I imagine there's a tiny party inside my lungs, and I ask it to keep going even when it's hard. Catherine stared at him, struck speechless. You imagine your body partying? Noah nodded. Yeah, because when you're happy, even sick things feel better, right? Catherine looked down at his useless legs. I wouldn't know. Noah looked up at him with all the seriousness a 5-year-old could muster. Maybe that's why I'm here. Eventually, the liaison called time. 5 more minutes, she said gently. Noah looked up, eyes alert. Can we do one last dance move? Catherine lifted a brow. Do I get to sit down for it? So you're already sitting, Noah pointed out. Fair. The boy stood and began to spin with his arms, a spiral that had no rhythm, no technique, just freedom. Catherine copied almost shyly. They spun their arms together, one seated, one standing, and for a flickering moment the world didn't matter. Not the case, not the court, not the broken history that clung to Catherine's every movement. Just this. A boy laughing at the sky, a man stirring invisible clouds, and something inside him, long frozen, moving again. When the time was up, Noah handed him the drawing from earlier. Keep it, he said, in case your legs forget again. Catherine accepted it without comment. He watched Noah walk away, skipping at first, then slowing to wave goodbye. The officers followed behind, silent. Catherine remained still, the drawing clenched in one hand. He didn't look at the staff. Didn't say a word. But inside, something absurd had taken root. That silly little dance. It had reached some place he thought had died. Dr. Harrison had seen Catherine Westbrook through every stage of grief, or at least what passed for grief in the man's carefully regulated life. As his neurosurgeon and longtime friend, Harrison had been the one to deliver the news years ago, after the accident. Severe spinal trauma, incomplete lesion. You may recover partial function, but full mobility is unlikely. Catherine had barely reacted. just nodded and said, "Understood." That was his way. Logical, controlled, unreachable, even in ruin. Harrison had tried in those early days to pull him towards some kind of emotional reckoning, support groups, new treatments, even music therapy, which Catherine had scoffed at. Over time, Harrison stopped trying. He just monitored his friend's chart and let him drift into routine, bench to bench, hearing to hearing, file to file. But now, for the first time in years, Catherine had come to him, not with a complaint, not with a legal query, but with a question. Can the mind trick the body into remembering how to move? Harrison had stared at him, unsure whether it was a rhetorical thought or a cry for help. "Why are you asking?" he'd replied. Catherine had simply said, "There's a boy. He thinks he can wake up my legs." That had led Harrison to the window of observation, watching from the edge of the hospital garden while Catherine awkwardly moved his arms under the boy's instruction. It was a strange sight, the once immovable judge performing what could only be described as interpretive arm flailing while a 5-year-old clapped along with glee. Harrison couldn't explain it. It wasn't physical therapy. It wasn't neurological stimulation. It was something else. Back in his office, he reopened Catherine's most recent scans. No structural change. No deviation from the last 3 years. The spinal cord remained the same, damaged, inflamed, but stable. There was no physical reason for Catherine's sudden improvements: lighter sleep, lower pain levels, improved circulation. Yet the man had reported all of it during their last check-in. "I haven't needed painkillers in a week," he'd said casually, as if discussing the weather. That, more than anything, unnerved Harrison. Neurology didn't just shift without cause. Pain doesn't just disappear because a child told a story. And yet Catherine wasn't lying. Harrison knew him well enough to see that. Later that afternoon, Harrison confronted him directly in the hospital cafeteria, where Catherine had taken to having tea. Another new behavior. "You're telling me," Harrison said, arms folded, "that this kid shows up with cookies and crayon drawings and suddenly your symptoms are improving?" Catherine didn't flinch. "I'm telling you, I'm not sleeping with a bottle of morphine beside me anymore. That's all." "You think this is psychosomatic?" Harrison pressed. "Spiritual?" The judge let out a low laugh. "Are those my only options?" "They're the only ones that fit," Harrison said. "There's no physiological evidence supporting recovery." Catherine met his gaze, "And yet here I am, stirring invisible soup in the park." The line was delivered with deadpan dryness, but Harrison didn't laugh. Something about it gnawed at him. He looked away, frustrated. "This isn't how medicine works." Catherine gave him a long look. "Maybe not, but maybe it's how healing works." The words lingered between them, heavy and unsettling. Harrison finished his coffee in silence, unable to shake the feeling that the boy, this Noah, had altered something fundamental in the man he'd once considered a closed case. That night, Harrison stayed late in his office. Not because he had patients waiting, but because something was stirring inside him. Something he hadn't allowed space for in a long time. After his wife's death, he had become mechanical, efficient, dependable. The sort of doctor people respected but rarely connected with. Emotions were filed away in academic papers and dry case notes. But tonight he couldn't concentrate. He found himself opening the drawer where he kept old personal files. Photos, mostly. Letters. The last voicemail his wife had left him before her seizure took her. He hadn't listened to it in years. He didn't now either. Just stared at the file name. "You never grieved," a therapist had once told him. "You intellectualized." Maybe that was true. Maybe it was also true of Catherine. Maybe they'd both buried their grief under credentials and routines. And now a boy who didn't even know how to tie his shoes properly was pulling them back into the sunlight, not through science, but through belief, through sheer disarming kindness. Harrison didn't know what to make of it. He only knew he couldn't explain it, and for a man like him that was terrifying. When Harrison finally did go home, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unwilling to sleep but too tired to resist it. When it finally came, his dreams were gentle and strange. He saw his wife, not in the sterile hospital version he'd grown used to replaying, but the way she was when they danced in the kitchen. Her hands in his, her laugh filling the silence, her body spinning barefoot in a rhythm only she understood. In the dream, she didn't say anything. She just smiled and touched his cheek. When Harrison woke, there was a single tear on his face. Warm, involuntary, and deeply unfamiliar. He sat upright, disoriented. He hadn't cried in years. Not at her funeral. Not in the weeks that followed. And yet now, after watching a child believe in something utterly impossible, he wept. Quietly, just once. And then he wiped it away. He didn't tell anyone. He didn't write it down. But something had happened. Not spiritual, not medical, but undeniably real. Something he could feel in his chest. In that moment, he stopped asking whether what was happening to Catherine was legitimate. He started asking what it meant. Back at the hospital the next day, Harrison greeted Catherine with his usual clinical detachment. They didn't speak of dreams or tears or the irrationality of hope. But when Catherine asked again, half serious, "You think the kid's doing this with his mind or his spirit?" Harrison didn't roll his eyes this time. He just shrugged and said, "Whichever one gets results." Catherine smirked and pushed his chair forward. Their silence layered now with something new. Not skepticism, not dismissal, but possibility. And that the faint glimmer of belief, not in science but in change, was more than either man had allowed themselves in years. Something was happening, and neither of them could name it. Not yet. The morning had started better than most. Catherine had arrived at the park with a rare glint of anticipation, disguised as always under his measured silence. Noah had beaten him there by 10 minutes, proudly holding a paper bag with 2 small juice boxes and what he called picnic crackers, though they were mostly crumbs at the bottom. "I saved them from yesterday," he announced, "because today is important." Catherine quirked an eyebrow. "Is it?" Noah nodded solemnly. "Yes, because today we don't just move arms. Today we talk." And talk they did. Seated by the small lake, they began tossing pebbles into the water, trying to skip them, though neither had any real technique. The conversation drifted toward memories, which Catherine usually avoided. But today, for some reason, he didn't. "What do you miss?" Noah had asked. Catherine had taken a long time to answer. "Music," he said at last. "I used to play. Not well, but often." Noah seemed to absorb that like a secret. Then in his small, quiet voice, he said, "I never saw the ocean." Catherine looked at him, really looked. "Then if I ever walk again," he said slowly, "I'll take you. That's a promise." And Noah believed him. It happened too fast for Catherine to even react. They were headed toward the ramp that led to the next level of the garden, a gentle slope that was normally easy to navigate. But someone had watered the flower beds earlier that morning, and the stone surface still held a sheen of slick moisture. Noah was pointing out a duck in the distance when the back wheels of the judge's chair caught at the edge. "Wait," he began, but it was too late. One wheel slid and the rest followed. The chair lurched violently to the side. Catherine's hands reached for the brakes, but they missed. The world tilted, metal struck stone, and then silence. Noah screamed before the sound even hit the air. "Judge?" he cried, running toward the fallen figure. Catherine wasn't moving. His body was twisted unnaturally, one side pressed against the pavement. There was blood, not a lot, but enough to stain. Noah fell to his knees beside him. "Judge Westbrook?" he whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. No response. "Somebody help," he shouted. "Please." A gardener nearby dropped his tools and came running. Minutes later, paramedics arrived. Noah was pushed back, trembling, his tiny hands smudged with dust and worry. At the hospital, everything moved quickly except time. Noah wasn't allowed past the waiting area. A nurse took his name, asked if he had a guardian. "He's my friend," was all Noah said. He was okay this morning. The staff tried to distract him with crayons and snacks, but he wouldn't touch anything. He sat hunched in a plastic chair, clutching the sleeves of his hoodie, rocking slightly. When Dr. Harrison arrived, his face told Noah everything before he said a word. A traumatic brain injury, he explained to the staff member beside him, unaware the boy was listening. Likely a concussion, maybe worse. "We'll need a scan to confirm intracranial swelling." Noah stood up. "Can I see him?" Harrison turned. "You're the boy," he said. "Noah, right?" The boy nodded. He was moving his arms, he was dancing. "I didn't think he would fall." His voice broke. "I didn't mean for him to fall." Harrison knelt down. "Hey, no one thinks this is your fault. But right now, the best thing you can do is wait. Can you do that for me?" Noah nodded again, too afraid to speak. He sat back down, hands still shaking, the fear burrowing deep into his chest like something alive. When the hospital finally made it clear that no visitors were allowed in the ICU, especially not unaccompanied minors, Noah didn't argue. He just stood at the edge of the hallway as close as they'd let him and whispered something into his closed fist. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his back pocket, a drawing he had made the night before. In it, he and Catherine were standing beside the ocean, both smiling, with little footprints in the sand and rocket-boosted wheel tracks behind them. He'd worked hard on the waves, even shaded the sky blue with an old colored pencil that barely had a point left. Now, holding it felt like trying to protect a promise from crumbling. He asked the nurse if she could give it to the judge. "Please," he added. "If he wakes up, tell him it's still real." The nurse gave him a small nod. She didn't promise. But she took it. That was enough. Noah sat back down, legs swinging under the bench, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Over and over he mouthed the words, "You promised. You promised." As if saying it enough times might somehow undo everything that had just broken. Hours passed, but time meant nothing to Noah anymore. He didn't ask for updates. He didn't want juice. He didn't even move much except to pull his hoodie tighter over his head whenever someone looked like they might talk to him. At some point, the social worker arrived, a woman with kind eyes and a clipboard too big for such a moment. "We'll have to call someone sweetheart," she said gently. "A guardian? A relative?" Noah just shook his head. "Can't leave," he said. "I'm supposed to fix him." The woman knelt down. "I know you care about him, but he's in good hands now." "Not enough," Noah replied. "He said 30 days. The woman frowned. "What do you mean?" But Noah didn't elaborate. He pressed his hands together like a prayer, not to a god, but to a memory of the last smile Catherine gave him before the fall. The words, "That's a promise." He couldn't forget that. Wouldn't, even if the adults around him started treating it like just another case. To Noah, it wasn't. It was everything. And so the boy waited, just outside the doors. They wouldn't let him through, holding on to nothing but a picture, a promise, and the memory of a man who moved his arms for the first time in years, just for him. The 30-day deal now dangled over them like a question with no answer. Trauma doesn't follow rules. Promises don't come with guarantees. And yet there he was. Alone, yes, but not giving up. Not yet. Not while there was still a flicker of belief that Catherine would wake up and remember the ocean they hadn't yet seen. Not while the drawing was still in the nurse's hands, waiting. Noah sat, fists clenched, breath shallow, eyes unblinking. The boy who had danced in the park now waited in silence, with a note in his pocket and fear rattling in his chest. Everything they'd built, their strange, fragile, hopeful connection, now balanced on the edge of a hospital bed. And all he could do was wait. David Chun had built a reputation on being immovable. In a courtroom, he was known for his precision, his lack of sentiment, and his unwavering dedication to the letter of the law. Mercy wasn't a concept he rejected. He simply didn't trust it. Too many defendants had cried through verdicts. Too many witnesses had twisted truths. And too many sob stories had begged for leniency that the law couldn't afford. He believed in structure, in rules, in outcomes that were predictable. But that belief had started to crack from the moment he'd seen the child, that boy. Noah, sitting quietly outside the ICU, curled up on a waiting bench, his head resting on a backpack as if it were the only thing in the world that still belonged to him. Chun had walked past him at first, as was his habit. Move forward, don't engage, don't get involved. But something made him stop this time. He turned back. The boy was asleep, lips slightly parted, clutching a folded paper in his hands even in slumber. A nurse walked by, noticed his hesitation. "He's been here since yesterday," she whispered. "Refuses to leave." Chun said nothing. But inside him something small and long dormant shifted. Later that afternoon, Chun found himself in Harrison's office, uninvited but not unwelcome. The doctor looked up, tired. "You here to tell me I've broken procedure?" he asked. Chun shook his head and sat. "I'm not sure what I'm here to do." Harrison leaned back. "That makes two of us." They sat in silence for a few moments before Chun spoke again. "I've been rereading the Langston case files." "Looking for justification?" Harrison asked. "Looking for understanding," Chun replied. "He stole. That's fact. But he also saved a life." Harrison nodded. "And the law doesn't always know what to do with that." Chun stared at the edge of the desk. "It's not just about the father, it's about that boy. He made a deal with the judge, 30 days, and now the judge is unconscious. No one's telling the boy what happens next." Harrison frowned. "Because we don't know what happens next." Chun met his eyes. "I'm not a man who believes in miracles, but maybe this isn't about that. Maybe it's about not making things worse for someone who's already carrying too much." Harrison said nothing, but there was a warmth in his silence. Chun sighed. "Let him in." The decision wasn't legal, it wasn't official, it wasn't even written down, but it was real. Chun signed off on it quietly with one condition. If anyone asks, it was a call made on compassion, not protocol. The staff hesitated, unsure. But the ICU nurse agreed to take Noah in, provided it was brief, supervised, and quiet. When they told the boy, he didn't speak. He simply stood, tightened the straps of his backpack, and followed without question. He clutched the drawing in both hands like a shield. As he stepped into the ICU, the world seemed to shrink around him. Tubes, wires, machines. He didn't understand any of them. But he understood the man lying still in the bed. Catherine Westbrook, pale and still, looked nothing like the strong, steady figure who had stirred imaginary clouds just days ago. Noah approached the bed slowly. The nurse hovered nearby but didn't interrupt. He reached out with one hand and found Catherine's. It was cold, heavy. He squeezed it gently. He whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm here." No response. Only the soft beep of monitors and the steady rhythm of machines breathing for the man who had once promised him the sea. Noah pulled the paper from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. He placed it on the blanket next to Catherine's arm, the drawing of them at the ocean, footprints in the sand, rockets on wheels. "Remember this?" he asked softly. "You said if you ever walked again, you'd take me there." He leaned closer, his small hand still wrapped around Catherine's fingers. "Well, ... I still believe you will. But you gotta come back, okay?" His voice trembled now. "I can't fix your legs if you're not awake." The room didn't answer. The machines didn't react. But Noah wasn't done. He rested his head gently on the edge of the bed. "You promised," he murmured. "You said the ocean was real, that one day we'd go see it. You said we'd leave tracks in the sand." The words weren't demands. They were memories, stitched together by faith. And then, as if responding to that quiet invocation, one of the monitors changed, a soft spike in heart rhythm. Barely perceptible, but it made the nurse glance up. Noah didn't notice. He just stayed there, eyes closed, holding on. A moment passed, then another. Noah lifted his head slightly. He thought he felt the judge's fingers twitch, but he wasn't sure if it was real or something he imagined. He didn't dare speak. He just kept holding that hand. The nurse took a small step closer, studying the screen. "That's new," she muttered. "What?" Noah asked, startled. She shook her head. "Could be nothing. Could be something." Her words were cautious, clinical. But Noah, in his heart, chose to believe it was something. "He heard me," he said. "He remembers." She didn't argue. Didn't try to explain it away. In truth, she didn't know what to believe anymore. She'd seen enough strange things in the ICU to know that not everything had a chartable cause. As she watched the boy lean back in, hand never letting go, she thought maybe, just maybe, this was one of those things. The boy stayed a few more minutes before the nurse gently tapped his shoulder. "Time to go, sweetheart." He nodded, stood slowly, and whispered one last time, "Don't forget the promise." Then he walked out, leaving the drawing behind, a reminder, a plea, and perhaps a spark. Inside the room, Catherine didn't wake. Not yet, but something beneath the surface stirred. An irregularity, a movement, a signal. The monitors reflected it. Subtle, quiet, but present. David Chun watched from the glass panel, arms folded, expression unreadable. Harrison stood beside him, his hand resting against the frame. "Still don't believe in miracles?" Harrison asked. Chun didn't answer right away. His eyes followed Noah as he disappeared down the hallway, small steps echoing with something larger than sound. "If it's not a miracle," Chun said finally, "then it has to be humanity." He turned and walked away. The room remained as it was, but not untouched. The boy had been inside, and the boy had spoken. And whether it was spirit, science, or something in between, something had heard him. In the dark space of unconsciousness, Catherine dreamed. But unlike the heavy, restless dreams that had haunted him since the accident, filled with metal screeches, overturned wheels, and silence, this dream was different. It was warm. Music played, but not from any record player. It was distant, ethereal, a melody he somehow knew but couldn't name. There was sand beneath him, hot and soft. The warmth curled around his toes, not wheels. He was barefoot, standing. His eyes searched the horizon, and in the distance he saw someone dancing. At first he thought it was Lena, her dress caught in the wind, laughing like she used to. But no, it was smaller. It was Noah, arms flailing with purpose, joy written into every movement, turning in the sand as if he were trying to summon the ocean itself. Catherine wanted to call out, but his voice didn't come. Instead, he stepped forward, and the grains of sand shifted under his feet. Not wheels, not pain, just movement, just breath. The music swelled. And then a whisper in the air, childlike and stubborn. "You promised me the ocean." His eyes opened slowly, reluctantly, like waking was harder than sleeping. There was no sand, no music, just light. Soft and unfamiliar. A blur of white above him. Machines humming faintly. But there beside him, unmistakably, was Noah, perched on the edge of the hospital bed, eyes wide with hope and fear tangled together. Fingers wrapped around his hand as if afraid he might disappear again. "Judge?" the boy whispered. Catherine blinked once. Then again. The world began to come into focus. His throat was dry, his body heavy, but his mind alert, present. "You're here," he rasped. Noah nodded, and a tear escaped down his cheek. "You came back," the boy said. Catherine tried to respond, but his voice gave way. He looked down at their joined hands, then slowly shifted his gaze toward the foot of the bed. For a moment, nothing. Then, a twitch. A small one. One toe moved, then another. His foot shifted, barely, but it moved. A whisper of life where there had been none. The nurse monitoring from just outside dropped her clipboard, eyes wide. She rushed inside, calling for Dr. Harrison. By the time he entered the room, Noah had already leaned forward, speaking to Catherine in that same low, steady tone he always used when coaxing the judge through one of their dances. "You can do it," he said. "I know you can. They're not broken. Just sleeping." Harrison came to the bedside, stared at the monitor, then down at Catherine's legs. "This isn't possible," he muttered, almost involuntarily. Catherine lifted his eyes toward his old friend. "But it's happening," he whispered. Harrison swallowed hard. "There's no neurological precedent. Your spinal cord, .. It's single quotes S ... double quotes," he trailed off. The science failed him. The boy hadn't. Noah turned to the doctor and said, "I told him his legs forgot how to be happy." Harrison could only stare, because right now something, whether emotional, neurological, or miraculous, had happened. And there was no denying it. Tears gathered at the corners of Catherine's eyes. Not from pain, but from the overwhelming weight of returning to a body he'd once written off as irretrievably lost. He turned to Noah. "You waited," he said. His voice cracked. "The deal," Noah replied simply. 30 days. You still have time." A quiet laugh escaped the judge's throat, more breath than sound. "I thought it was just a game," he admitted. Noah shook his head. "It was never a game." Then, unable to hold it back, the boy sobbed, quiet, broken sobs that cracked open the room. Catherine reached out, not with robotic stiffness, but with something like intention, and pulled the boy gently onto the bed, letting Noah collapse against his chest. The nurse stepped back. Harrison stepped out. They knew better than to interfere with a moment this pure. For a long time there was no speaking, just breath, just tears, just reunion. Outside the ICU, the staff began to whisper. Stories of movement, of impossible nerve response, of a boy who had walked into a sealed-off unit and come out different, and left the patient different too. Word reached Chun, who stood motionless when Harrison confirmed it with a dazed expression. "He's awake," Harrison said, "and something's changed. Not just his mind. His body's responding." Chun didn't say anything at first, then finally, "What do we tell the board?" Harrison gave a dry, shaky laugh. "Tell them the kid negotiated better than we did." Back in the room, Catherine held Noah's hand like it was the only real thing left in the world. And maybe it was. Because when all explanations failed, science, law, logic, only one truth remained. The boy had never stopped believing. And somehow, that had been enough. The world didn't go back to what it was. It couldn't. Catherine would never unlive the accident or erase the grief that had shadowed his every waking moment since. But something had shifted. His legs were not whole, not healed in the way miracles are portrayed in fairy tales, but they moved. And more than that, he wanted them to move. For the first time in years, he felt the pull of wanting to be in this world again, of dancing even if it looked absurd, of chasing promises he thought he was too broken to keep. He looked down at Noah, curled against him, still sniffling, still clutching the drawing of the ocean. Catherine's eyes filled again. The world hadn't returned to what it once was. It had returned with something else, something softer, something truer, something whole. The courtroom had never been this full. Every seat occupied, every row buzzing, not with chatter but with anticipation, a strange, collective silence that carried both reverence and disbelief. Word had spread, not officially but through whispers, text messages, and curious retellings. The judge who walked again, the boy who changed him. Some came for gossip, others came for faith. Most came because something unexplainable had happened, and no one wanted to miss how it would end. Then at precisely the scheduled time, the double doors opened. Catherine Westbrook entered, not wheeled, not carried, but walking slowly, steadily with the help of a cane. The room rose as one, not out of habit, but out of something closer to awe. Catherine didn't meet their eyes at first. He walked with quiet focus, his jaw tight, breath controlled. Every step cost him something, but it gave him back more. When he reached the bench, he turned, faced the room, and only then allowed himself to look directly at the man standing before him, Robert Langston. Robert stood in a borrowed suit that was one size too big, shoulders hunched with the weight of the unknown. His hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. He had barely slept, his thoughts bouncing between the image of his son alone in a hospital and the possibility that he might never hold him again. But when he saw the judge standing, his breath caught in his throat. He had not believed the stories. Couldn't afford to. But now, seeing Catherine in front of him, upright, changed. He felt something shift in his chest. Not relief. Not yet. Just the terrifying, tender hope that this might not end in loss. Catherine took a breath, looked at him for a long moment, and then spoke. "Mr. Langston," he began, his voice even but warm. "3 weeks ago you stood in front of me accused of theft. Today you stand in front of me having taught this court and this man something far more important than guilt or innocence." A hush fell deeper over the room. Robert blinked hard, unsure if he was hearing correctly. "The verdict has changed," Catherine said, pausing to let the words settle. "Because a boy, your boy, reminded me that justice isn't only about balance, it's about repair. It's about joy. And it's about believing people are more than the worst decision they've ever made." Robert opened his mouth, but no words came. He looked down, then up again, dazed. Catherine continued, "You did break the law, but you did it out of love, not recklessness, not greed. And thanks to your son, I was forced to confront a question I've long avoided. What is the role of mercy when the law is already clear?" He looked out across the courtroom. "Today, I choose mercy, not as an escape from accountability, but as a doorway to dignity." A ripple moved through the room. Some gasped, some whispered. Robert looked like he might collapse, but stayed standing. "You are hereby absolved of further charges," Catherine announced. "In addition, this court has partnered with a local initiative, one we helped create to provide you with employment, housing, and access to health care for your son." It was too much at once. Robert's knees buckled, and he caught himself on the table beside him. His attorney gripped his arm, whispering, "It's real. You're free." The words didn't compute right away. Freedom had been a distant concept, theoretical, impossible. But now it had a shape, a sound, a sentence spoken in front of everyone. From the back of the courtroom, a blur of movement, Noah burst forward, cutting through the narrow aisle like a current, feet pounding on wood. The guards moved, but Catherine raised a hand. "Let him through." Noah launched into his father's arms, the force knocking Robert back a step. The man dropped to his knees, clutching the boy so tight it looked like he might never let go. "You did it," Noah sobbed. "No, you did," Robert whispered. "You saved me." They cried together right there in front of everyone, and no one dared to interrupt, not a single objection, not even a cough, just the sound of a promise fulfilled. In the judge's line of sight, 2 men stood quietly. David Chun, arms folded, gave one slow, deliberate nod, then to the shock of many began to applaud. Just once, then again. The rest of the room followed. It wasn't the polite applause of a verdict announced. It was something closer to gratitude. And standing beside him, Dr. Harrison pressed his lips together, visibly moved. His hand lifting to his face, not to adjust his glasses, but to quietly wipe away a tear. Catherine caught his eye, and Harrison nodded. No words passed between them. None were needed. A boy had walked into their lives with no title, no power, no agenda, and left behind a changed man. A freed father, a restored courtroom, and maybe even a reawakened city. Catherine stayed at the bench until the last person exited. Robert and Noah lingered, then walked slowly past him. Robert stopped, turned to speak, but his voice cracked. Catherine gave him a single nod. "Take care of him," he said. "You've earned this second chance. Make it count." Robert could only nod back, holding his son close. Noah, beaming through tears, gave the judge a small salute before they walked out the courtroom doors together. And in that moment, just for a moment, the city seemed to pause and believe again. Not in the law, not even in miracles, but in people and in the idea that maybe, just maybe, stories like this weren't fairy tales. Maybe they were just rare and real. Months had passed, but the memory of those courtroom days had not faded, not for any of them. And now, here they were. Catherine Westbrook stepped slowly onto the sand, the cane supporting him not just physically but symbolically, marking every footfall with intention. Noah was ahead of him, his laughter rising above the wind as he let the ocean chase his bare feet. Catherine had dreamed of this moment, but not in a literal sense, more like a feeling, a longing, an ache in the chest for something unfinished. And now it was happening. Every step toward the water was a step away from grief, from paralysis, not only of body but of spirit. Harrison walked beside him, no longer just the doctor or the skeptic, but something deeper, steadier, a presence. Robert was several steps away trying to operate the camera Noah insisted he use, muttering jokes about getting the angle right while failing to hold back the smile stretching across his face. The family they had become wasn't traditional, but it was real. That was all that mattered now. Noah ran toward Catherine with both hands in the air, shouting, "It's here! The sea's really here!" as if the judge himself had conjured it with a promise. Catherine smiled, not a practiced courtroom smile, not the polite nod of a public figure, but something fuller, unguarded. "I told you I'd bring you," he said, lowering himself onto one knee with effort but no complaint. His hand reached down to the shoreline, fingers breaking through the foamy edges of a receding wave. It was cold but alive. "And you," he added, looking at Noah, "you kept your word too." The boy tilted his head. "What word?" Catherine didn't answer right away. He glanced at Harrison, then at Robert, then back at the boy. "You said you'd fix my legs," he said softly. "But you did more than that, Noah. You fixed something. I didn't even know it was broken." The boy looked confused for a moment, then hugged the judge so tightly it forced a grunt from Catherine's lungs. "I didn't fix," Noah whispered. "I just danced with you." The tide rolled in and out, uncaring of who they were, yet somehow bearing witness to what had unfolded. Harrison sat down next to Catherine, brushing off the sand from the bottom of his slacks, and said, "I remember a man who used to argue logic with me all night long." "You'd have called this foolishness," Catherine laughed. "I still would on paper." Then he looked at Harrison with that same rare vulnerability, "But in real life, I'm done hiding behind reason." Harrison nodded. "Good," he said, "because I like this version of you better." Catherine looked out toward Noah and Robert, who were now splashing each other in the shallow surf. "I do too," he admitted. "He brought us back, didn't he?" Harrison smiled. "He reminded us how to be alive." For a long moment, they said nothing more. They just watched the ocean, shoulder to shoulder, both changed in ways that neither science nor doctrine could quantify. Robert returned with the camera swinging from his wrist, dripping wet from chasing Noah into the waves. "I got it," he said. "You won't believe how ridiculous I looked trying to take a picture mid-run." Catherine chuckled. "You always were terrible at multitasking." Robert dropped down beside them, breathless but happy. "You know, I spent months waiting for something to go wrong," he said. "And now I don't know what to do with everything going right." Catherine looked at him carefully. "Then start with this. Believe it's real. Don't wait for it to break. Build something with it." Robert nodded, not quite able to speak. Noah, now curled in the sand with his arms forming pillow shapes beneath his head, watched the three adults and smiled without saying a word. He had always known this was possible. He just needed them to catch up. Then, as if knowing the moment needed its final seal, Noah stood and pulled something out of his pocket. It was folded and worn, edges softened from handling. "I saved this," he said, walking over and placing the paper in Catherine's lap. The judge opened it slowly. It was a drawing, the last in a long line of sacred sketches, and this one was different. It showed the four of them, Catherine, Noah, Robert, and Harrison, standing together holding hands. Behind them, the sea stretched wide, with the sun low on the horizon and a single gull flying across the sky. "That's us," Noah said proudly. "Now it's true." Catherine traced the lines with his finger. "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse. "It's true." There were no ceremonies, no speeches, just the silent agreement of hearts, finally mended. He looked up, saw the real sea behind the imagined one, and for the first time felt like he belonged there. And then came the final moment, quiet but whole. Catherine touched the water again, his fingers digging slightly into the wet sand, anchoring himself. He stood slowly, his cane sinking slightly with each step, and turned to Noah. "You were right," he said. "You fulfilled your promise." Noah grinned, running toward the waves again. "And you," the judge called after him, voice steadier now, "you healed more than my legs." Noah turned just in time to catch the words. "I know," he replied. "You healed me too." Above them, a lone seagull cut across the sky, its wings wide and confident, slicing through the wind like a letter finally sent. Behind them, laughter echoed. Ahead of them, the world made sense. Maybe not perfect, but aligned. And for the first time in a long, long while, every single thing felt exactly where it was supposed to be. We poured our hearts into bringing this story to life, not just as a team, but as a community that believes in the power of love, healing, and second chances. If this story touched you, even just a little, we'd be truly honored if you subscribe to our channel. It's your support that helps us continue creating meaningful stories like this one, and trust us, each one takes days, sometimes weeks, to craft with the care it deserves. Tell us in the comments, what part of this journey stayed with you the most? Your words matter. They guide us, inspire us, and remind us that we're not just telling stories, we're sharing something real with people who feel just like you. Take a moment to explore our other videos. There's a good chance one of them will speak right to your heart. Thank you for being here, truly. We'll see you in the next one.